and he will introduce Khalique Rogers, because I didn't know that you were coming, so I don't know very much. So, Joe Nathan has been an inner city public school aide, teacher, and administrator. He was selected to coordinate a National Governors Association project, Time for Results, the governor's 1991 report on education. More than 30 state legislatures and several congressional committees have asked him to testify on various education issues. Student, parent, and professional groups have given him awards for his work. Joe has helped write several major laws, including Post Secondary Enrollment Options and the nation's first charter public school law. That's here, carried by Betsy Kelso, correct? Yep, that's it. He served as a local PTA president in St. Paul and a member of the Minnesota State PTA board. He has written 3 books and edited a 4th. More than 30 newspapers, including the Wall Street Journal and USA Today, have published guest columns that he has written. For 15 years, Joe wrote a weekly column carried by 3 of Minnesota's 4 largest daily papers. He now writes a twice-a-month column for many suburban and rural Minnesota newspapers, and the local Golden Valley Sun Post is one of them. I've seen them there. He has appeared on more than 400 television and radio programs, including The Today Show, Good Morning America, McNeil-Lehrer NewsHour, and All Things Considered. Joe earned a BA from Carleton, MA and PhDs from the University of Minnesota. He's been married for 46 years to a retired St. Paul public school teacher. They have 3 children and 5 granddaughters, all of whom attended and graduated from St. Paul public schools. Joe, we were very honored to have you here today to talk to us about what you've been working on. Thank you very much.
So Khalique and I are going to talk. You probably figured out this is Khalique.
That's why I just took off the name tag.
We're going to talk with you for maybe 12 to 15 minutes. We want to make sure that there's time for conversation.
Feel free to use the mic too, Joe, because we are recording and
Okay.
you can hold it in your hand.
All right.
If you don't understand behind the podium.
Thank you, Brian. So, Khalique and I have known each other for 12 years, and that means that he was 6 when we met. Not really. We've known each other since he was a high school student in St. Paul. He will tell you a bit about that, but he is a remarkable young man. He's recently completed the Harvard Young Leaders Program. He has just been nominated and accepted into the Humphrey Youth Policy Fellows Program. He was named by Twin Cities Business Journal this year as one of the 50 African Americans that you should know, that's their phrase, you should know, in the Twin Cities. He has been able to convince Minnesota legislators, and there's a room full of people here who know about what it's like to try to convince Minnesota legislators. He was able to convince Minnesota legislators to allocate millions of dollars for some things that we're going to talk about. And we're going to discuss some very encouraging things that we think are happening, and we're going to talk about some possible areas of collaboration between ourselves and some of you. So, Khalique, you want to talk a little bit about this project that's mentioned here?
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so thank you for the warm introduction. Once again, I'm Khalique Rogers, and we're going to tell you just about some of our work here that we've been doing in the state of Minnesota. You know, at one point in time, as a student, as Joe was mentioning, I met him when I was 17. Actually, it's because of his PSEL program, the dual credit. I was the only student in my high school to take advantage of that program. I went to an alternative school. Some would say those schools are, the second, third chance. And it was based off of me being in homeschool, my mom just seeing the neighborhood and seeing what was going on. She was like, you know what, I was gonna homeschool you for a little bit, get you out of the way. I was bored stiff, and whenever she would leave home, I would switch tabs, go do my own thing. I would, not necessarily focus on the schoolwork, but I work on my own projects, things that I was interested in, things that I was passionate about. I was able to win different prizes off of YouTube. I didn't know at the time that I had a presence, but I was utilizing it my own way. Long story short, that led me to want to graduate, and I realized I need to catch up on credits, which led me to Gordon Parks High School in St. Paul. And that's where I noticed it's like you leaving the matrix and then you go back into it with fresh eyes. And I'm like, what in the world is going on here? This level of low expectation I felt it. And that's what made me want to exceed expectations. And I took an acuplacer, which let me know if I leveled into college reading and writing and math, which is what led me to taking the PSEO opportunities. And it was an opportunity that was kind of like this. If I didn't have this mic, you'd see a hand out. and behind their back, there were more opportunities. And for that reason, I decided to challenge myself beyond their expectations. And although it was told to me that it'd be a difficult opportunity to take PSEO, I decided to say, those are your fears and not mine. I want to give it a shot. And lo and behold, I met Morpheus, and changed my life forever. Long story short, I did things that were based off of my interest, insights, and energy. Things that I wanted to do, what was my passions. And that's something that Dr. Nathan here was able to see in me when I didn't see that in myself. And he let me see how deep the rabbit hole really went. It led me to noticing and really having the language to describe my lived experiences and what was wrong with it. And when some of those issues stemmed from systemic issues that we wanted to tackle. One in particular is youth and family homelessness. That's something I experienced as a young person, coming from Chicago, Illinois, moving to the land of 10,000 lakes. I call it the land of 10,000 nonprofits. And through that, I had noticed, not just my experience, but many others, is that we only get supported from the programs here if you were a single parent having children, and a woman at that. And me coming into Minnesota with my family, my father was with me, but we couldn't receive any support based off of him being in the household. So that led to a serious and timely decision on, are we going to house our kids or are we going to stay together and struggle through that process? And my parents made the executive decision, like, hey, if we're going to get support for the kids, you can just go to Mary Jo's place, downtown Minneapolis, and that experience changed my life. It did provide housing, but it was a caveat. I couldn't have my father in the picture. And that is a story that is not just my story, it's many others. And I wanted to do something about it. So lo and behold, I met this gentleman, and he asked me one day, what is an issue that you want to work on from your lived experience? And I said, youth and family homelessness. And I want to see why systemically these things are happening, but more importantly, what solutions can we create to end the cycle? And so what we did at the legislature last year is we were able to convince, through a bipartisan bill that passed, is to increase affordable housing in the state by teaching youth trade skills and workforce development that increases their graduation rates, increases affordable housing in the state. And also what it does is it goes towards home ownership for Black and brown families in the state as well. So we're able to convince the legislature to allocate $4 million to youth build, as well as another bill, I'm not sure if there's another slide. Perfect. And that program in particular is where they either rehab existing structures and homes or buildings and teach youth how to build those spaces. But we also had amended previous language to the Minnesota Housing Finance Agency. And one of the things I was curious about is, how do we work with cross-sector collaborations? How do we create a space where all these nonprofits and all these silos in these spaces who are working on similar initiatives, we're not connecting to see where they intersect? And this is a way for me that we were able to convince by talking to the commissioner of Minnesota Housing Finance. And I asked her, well, this bill I'm working on is going to come right to your office. And rather than to try this out my own way, I want to see how we can include you on the design and how we want to implement this. And we said the idea is to utilize the funds from the Minnesota Housing Finance Agency's challenge grant. And that grant is, well, that technically at that time, that loan was given out to developers so they can build more affordable housing in the state. And I said, well, what about all these young people who have interest, energy, and insights on what they may want to work on, and trades is one of them. But how about we teach them the trade skills while they're in high school to help build affordable housing? So they're doing the social impact initiative. Well, the legislature called it a triple win because it worked on workforce, education, and the housing shortage for affordable housing in the state. So through that, I went through 5 hearings, 2 of which I didn't even have to go to. They said, we love this idea so much, we just want to hear it. And, and we were able to convince them to now that schools historically can access $100,000 in grant funds to go towards home building capacity throughout the whole state of Minnesota for high schools. So there's that big win.
So one of the suggestions, opportunities that we want to make to you is that in January of 2025, the Minnesota Housing Finance Authority is going to put out a request for proposals to high schools all over the state. And we know that you all, in many cases, have connections to high schools. So we'd like to propose that you join us in informing the high schools about this opportunity. This is a first-time opportunity. It's never happened before. And there's a special RFP, that's a request for proposals, that's going to go out in January from the Minnesota Housing Authority, and they have allocated a significant amount of money. High schools can apply for up to $100,000 to do things like this. So what you just saw was a project done by kids on the west side of St. Paul. This was a tax forfeited property. We know we have the former mayor, is that right, of Golden Valley in the room. This was tax forfeited property in St. Paul. It was in very bad shape. And the youngsters from high school rehabbed it. It's now an apartment for 6 formerly homeless veterans. I see that the governor has proclaimed today is ending Veteran Homelessness Day, and this is part of the answer. They took a tax forfeited home that was in very bad shape and fixed it up beautifully, and directly across the yard, you can't see it right now, but directly across the yard is another building with all these different partners, and that houses congregate dining, some social service agencies, a gym, and some other resources, so that the veterans who are living in the apartments directly across the way can get these services. This is another example of the kind of idea that we have of combining classroom work and community service. And as Khalique mentioned, I write a column for a number of suburban and rural newspapers, including Golden Valley, including Maple Grove. There are about 15 different newspapers that are weeklies, and they reach 100,000 people. And this idea has become very timely. This is about a 40-year-old idea. When I was a public school teacher in St. Paul, we had a class where kids solved consumer problems that adults referred to them, and we had hundreds of these cases. These are real cases, not pretend, these are real cases. We successfully resolved about 80% of them and used the creativity of the young people. And this brochure that's going around is a great example, because that brochure was the product. Could you just hold up the brochure for a second? The inside brochure. Yep.
What is on the screen?
Yep, that one. Yep, that was the result of some young people, because I was cynical and I didn't think we were going to be able to find anybody who would donate the production of that flyer, but some young people said, well, let's go ask them. So they went to 4 or 5 different printing places, and one of the printing places donated 10,000 copies of that brochure. So we were able to get a lot of different cases. Anyway, what goes around comes around. So what's just happened is that the state legislature has decided as of last year that effective in 2 years, all students must, before they graduate, take some financial literacy courses, because one of the principal reasons for people dropping out of college and university is they haven't learned to manage their money, and they get deluged with credit card offers, and some of them quickly find their way into deep, deep debt. So anyway, you might want to work with us to get this information out to some of the high schools in the area, because This is something that they could do. We recently convened a number of high school youngsters from all over the state. We're going to talk about that in a minute. But one of the things that they said was they really want to have active learning. They don't want to just listen to lectures. They don't want to read the chapter and answer the questions at the end. They're willing to do some of that, but they want to have active learning, like building houses, like solving consumer problems. So Khalique's going to talk a little bit about the value of Post Secondary Enrollment Options, PSEO. One of the interesting things about this is that the state of Minnesota is widely proclaimed by news media to have free food for all high school kids and elementary school kids. You've probably seen that in the Star Tribune, New York Times, Washington Post, USA Today, et cetera, et cetera. Well, it happens not to be quite true, because high school kids who take courses on college campuses are not eligible for this, which is a real disincentive. Now, you can't see this, but Khalique's going to talk about his experiences. I want to show you just a couple of things. I apologize you can't see this, but what this is a chart from the state of Minnesota showing that, for example, 4 years ago, the overall graduation rate was 70, for African American kids was 62%, but for African American kids who took part in PSEO, it was 92%, a 30-point increase. Same is true for every one of these groups: African American, American Indian, Hispanic, Asian American. And some people have said to us, well, those kids are more naturally inclined to take PSEO. No, actually not true. One of the reasons that Khalique and I started working together is because he was, as he said, the only person who took a course on a college campus from his high school, and he was discouraged, not encouraged, discouraged from doing so. So he's going to talk a little bit about the personal value of PSEO. I want to thank you for helping make not only that law start off, but survive, because, as a number of you know, it was a controversial law. It still is a controversial law. Post-secondary enrollment has been used now by more than 200,000 young people. It literally saves millions of dollars. The latest research shows that it saves families about $9 million a year. Sorry, it saves the taxpayers about $9 million a year, and it saves high school families about $60 million a year. So it's enormously cost effective, but it's still controversial. Khalique's going to talk a little bit about the value for him.
So beyond all the amazing reasons Joe echoed already, I'd just like to say that overall the experience for me did multiple things. One, it helped me expand my vision of possibilities. Now, prior to me taking on, these types of classes, PSEO and things of that nature, college seemed unachievable based off of the dollar amount. I'm like, well, if I barely got 2 nickels to rub together, where am I gonna find a couple $1,000s? Tens of thousands. And when I seen that there was an opportunity to take the classes for free, that's when my eyes opened up. It was like, well, this looks like an opportunity. And more than an opportunity, it's giving me an opportunity to take a leap of faith on myself and do it while I'm in the care and in the environment of my educators and teachers. It gave me an option that also helped me not only take the classes for college, but do it in an environment where I didn't always have to leave school, because that can be a barrier, because there's an aspect to it where you can have college in schools as well. So you don't have to go to the university, you can take the college classes where you're at. It also helped me when I was applying for colleges, since I already had A's in my classes already from taking college courses. They helped me to get accepted into the U, and before that, St. Paul College, which actually, funny thing, full circle, is now I'm on the President's Advisory Board at St. Paul College. She was actually the one that nominated me for the Harvard Business School Young American Leaders Program, and I was able to throw the first pitch at the Saints game. Fun opportunity. Me and Joe, I didn't know, he's lived a couple lives before I came around, so he's like, I used to teach softball. I was like, really? So we practiced, twice? It was fun, and went straight over the plate. Got an amazing video to show y'all if you want to see it. But to that point, it expanded my vision of possibilities. And the goal right now is to make sure that this is advocated to other youth, and not just youth in suburbs that can be predicted to take advantage of the opportunity. because as you can see, I wasn't encouraged. And once I took it, I was like, what? There's a whole world out there of opportunities that we can take advantage of, but they're not being advocated to our communities. And that was one big thing that Joe came and interviewed me. And the funny thing, he gave me a gift card. He's like, your time is valuable. And I want to interview you about your experience. And beyond that interview, he paired that with an opportunity. He said, you want to go and advocate about these programs to other youth. And I looked at him and he said, and they'll listen to you a lot more than they'll listen to me. And that literally was the beginning of our relationship. And 12 years later, now I'm the executive director of the Center for School Change. And through that work, we've been actually able to pass millions of dollars and focusing on not just education, but through the lens of how I see the world, our goals have changed a little bit in the sense of how do we focus on the holistic needs of youth and families, housing, workforce, and education, and seeing how those intersect. Because it intersected for me when I was in high school. I was like, well, how do you expect me to focus if I'm not getting my basic needs met at home? And then how do you expect me, if I don't have housing, how am I going to focus on education? And then if there's no workforce development, how am I going to scale in life? And all these things are interconnected in different ways that some people may assume that these are in people's households and that they're normal. And I'll do one brief story to express that. When I first came to Minnesota, let me know if you got time. All right, cool. When I first came to Minnesota, and I remember I told you I was at Mary Jo's place in Minneapolis, right? So I had started, this is my kindergarten story. Yes, I remember when I was in kindergarten. And it's rare, because some people don't recognize or have moments of clarity that early in life. But I knew I was in a foreign place, and I was in kindergarten. We had an assignment. And my teacher looked at it kind of like this. She was like, all right, class, we're going to draw pictures of our homes. And I'm like, okay. And so she's like, all right. So look how I'm drawing the home. So she made a home, typical white picket fence, a dog, family, yada, 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 garage. Cute picture. And she's like, all right, class, your turn. And so I was seeing all my peers grab the big, the giant crayons that you grab in one hand and scribble it. And I hesitated as a child. I was like, well, that doesn't look like my home. And for me, I had to just make a decision to write what was expected of me in that moment. And so I did. But that moment gave me the curiosity of wondering why. Why are these things this way? And why is this the norm, but that's not my experience? And I noticed that was a perpetual theme for me in education, that my experience wasn't spoken on. It was ignored. In fact, it was invisible. And that's the same thing that I noticed as I grew. And while I was in high school, I noticed my peers who were also homeless, or some of them stayed at my house, slept on my couch, and things of that nature. I noticed my peers in general. I was like, this is an invisible issue that no one's speaking on. Because young people are not just going to say, hey, I'm homeless, yo. They're going to hide it as best as they can. But if you have the ability to see past just the face value, you can start noticing things. Why doesn't that young person take his hoodie off? Or he's quiet, or he's kind of to himself, and so many other things. But it's the relationship building aspect of it as a whole. When I met Joe, it surprised me, because it was someone who was asking me what I thought and what I think, and perceived it, and I perceived it as like, wow, I'm kind of valuable. And beyond him just saying it, he paired it with opportunity. And then I was able to utilize the moments that I took advantage of to help others. And this is an opportunity we can do that as well. We're actually working with students at High School of Recording Arts in St. Paul. And the crazy thing is, there's a young person who had a similar story to me, which I knew, but it's the fact that we have to go to these young people and ask them. But what was so interesting is he said, yeah, I took PSEO, and yeah, I was also experiencing homelessness at the same time, but I wanted to try and take these opportunities, although I had all this adversity. And one key thing that he spoke on was, well, I was taking classes that we couldn't eat because I was a high school student taking PSEO, and the law says that if you're taking PSEO, you're not going to have free lunch. And this is a direct quote from the young person who we're working with now. And so we're doing a service learning project. I'm sure maybe some of you know that civic engagement is a state standard now for high school. And there was an allocation to that grant, to that opportunity where it's called the Service Learning Innovation Grant. So we were able to get 2 high schools that grant, so they're working with us. And we asked them what they want to work on. That's the caveat. The students themselves must pick the ideas. And the young people wanted to work on 3 projects within this grant opportunity. They wanted to make 3 PSA announcements. One was on youth homelessness, workforce development, and dual credit and PSEO. And the one that they want to work on the most, I said, which one do you guys want to start out with? And they said, well, I want to do youth homelessness. One of them. And then the other one was like, yeah, me too. And then everyone's like, yeah, let's just work on that first, because half of them said they had experienced it or currently experienced it or knew someone within their friend group who was, or something that they see on a daily basis. And through that, this is what carries on to the opportunities we're focused on today.
So in the interest of making sure you have time to comment or ask, or both, we're going to go through the last couple real quick. This remarkable young man has done many things, and if you're particularly interested, we can talk about this. This was a 6-year effort that resulted in a beautiful new playground in St. Paul on what had formerly been a weed-filled vacant lot. And we can say more about that, but he led this effort when he was in high school, and he was asked to be the master of ceremonies when it was dedicated a couple of years ago. Remarkable story. And this is a project that we worked on in November 2023, and we're going to try to do the same thing on November 23rd of this year. We brought together 65 young people from all over the state, from as far away as Pelican Rapids and Hinckley and Duluth and Owatonna, and so on and so on and so on. Many people bring high school kids to the Capitol. They have interesting discussions, they pass resolutions and so on. This was a group that was different because we actually worked with the kids over a period of 5 months, arranging for them to testify, asking them to identify their priorities, asking them which things you really wanted to work on. We can talk more about that if you're particularly interested, and we were able to get several of the bills passed that the youngsters had proposed. There's an enormous amount of research showing that if young people have an opportunity to be civically engaged, not just in reading, not just in writing answers at the end of chapters, but actually doing something that makes a difference, it changes the way they think about themselves and changes the way they behave in the world. So this is something that we are interested in working with you on. We have some money raised. We need a little bit more money. So we're interested in talking with you about that if you're interested. So anyway, here are some opportunities that we see. This won't cost you a cent. We are interested if some of you want to help us spread the word about the millions of dollars available for high schools to apply for money to create programs in which young people learn construction skills while they build homes for low-income families. There are new service learning requirements. This can be tied into financial literacy. We're interested in knowing if you want to help use some of your contacts with high schools to talk about that. And then we have a November 23rd meeting coming up. I'd love to work with some of you on that. So, we'd love to hear your reactions and questions.
For the first opportunity, who at a school or school district would be the right contact for that?
It varies. Generally, it makes sense to start with the superintendent or the chair of the school board, but the chair of the school board usually turns to the superintendent. So I would say the superintendent or the high school principal, but it would probably be either the superintendent or the high school principal. And again, there are no catches. The money is there. It's allocated. We have emails from the Minnesota Housing Finance Agency, which we'd be glad to share. And you can send them to the you can send them to the superintendent or the high school principals. But I would say those two, the principal or the superintendent, possibly the head of career and technical education, but the head of career and technical education is probably gonna have to get permission from the superintendent and school board to apply. So I would say superintendent or principal.
Joe, are you and Khalique available a couple of minutes after the
Yes.
meeting here? Well, wonderful. Give me a hand.